No one knew that a quiet December evening in Montgomery, Alabama, would set an entire nation on fire. A 42-year-old seamstress sat firmly in her seat on a city bus, refusing to give up her place to a white passenger. Her name was Rosa Parks, and in that moment, she made the impossible feel inevitable. But her courage wasn't born overnight. Her refusal was the spark, not the reason. The civil rights movement erupted. The truth runs much deeper, through centuries of injustice, resilience, and a rising wave of people demanding that America finally live by its own promise: freedom and equality for all. The roots of the movement began long before the world ever heard of Martin Luther King Jr. or saw the March on Washington. Its foundation was laid in the brutal era of slavery. For over 250 years, millions of Africans were stolen from their homelands, trafficked across the Atlantic, and forced into unpaid labor in the American South. Their bodies built the Cotton Empire. Their sweat filled the nation's economy. But their humanity? That was denied. Families torn apart. Culture erased. Hope punished. Yet even in chains, resistance lived, in whispered prayers, secret songs, and daring escapes. Then came the American Civil War, and by 1865, slavery was abolished. Freedom on paper. The United States had ended one system of oppression, only to replace it with another, one more subtle, yet equally cruel. The years that followed brought the rise of Jim Crow laws, a regime dedicated to segregation and humiliation. Black Americans were legally forced to use separate schools, restaurants, train cars, and even drinking fountains. They were blocked from voting, shut out from decent jobs, and targeted with violence if they dared resist. Racist terror groups like the Ku Klux Klan patrolled the night, burning crosses and homes to send a clear message: know your place. But they refused that place. After World War II, the pressure inside the boiling pot of America surged. Black soldiers had gone overseas to fight for democracy, defeating Nazis who believed in racial supremacy, only to return home to experience the very ideology they risked their lives to destroy. They asked a painful question: why should they defend freedoms they themselves did not have? At the same time, technology accidentally became a weapon for justice. Television brought images into every living room. Images of peaceful black citizens beaten with batons, dragged by police dogs, and blasted by fire hoses for simply standing up for their rights. The brutality could no longer stay hidden in the shadows of small southern towns. The whole world was watching. And then, history turned toward Montgomery. On that December bus in 1955, Rosa Parks was exhausted, not from work, but from centuries of injustice. Her arrest ignited fury and hope all at once. Black leaders called for a boycott of the bus system. A young pastor named Martin Luther King Jr. stepped into leadership, his voice calm, yet thunderous, his message simple: nonviolent resistance could break an empire of hate. For 381 days, thousands walked miles instead of riding buses. The city tried intimidation, arrests, and threats, but the people did not bend. And finally, the Supreme Court ruled that bus segregation was unconstitutional. But victory bred retaliation. In Little Rock, Arkansas, 9 brave black students faced mobs of hatred just to attend school. In Greensboro, North Carolina, college students sat at whites-only lunch counters, enduring verbal abuse and spit hurled onto their clothing, refusing to leave. In freedom rides across the South, young activists risked their lives to integrate interstate buses. Some never returned home. Still, the movement grew powerful. Songs of courage filled church basements. We shall overcome. Black Americans were no longer pleading for change, they were demanding it. And the world took notice when 250,000 people gathered in Washington, D.C. to hear a speech that would echo for generations. Martin Luther King Jr. painted a dream so vivid that even those who opposed equality could not forget his words. His voice rose above the Lincoln Memorial, promising a future where children of every color would join hands as equals. Yet progress always comes with pain. Churches were bombed. Activists were murdered. Dr. King himself was assassinated for daring to believe in justice. But before his tragic death, he and countless others had already shifted the ground beneath America's feet. So why did the civil rights movement begin? Because Black Americans refused to remain silent in a nation built on freedom. Because mothers wanted their children to walk into a school without fear. Because fathers wanted to vote without being beaten or threatened. Because teenagers wanted dignity, not separate doors and back alley entrances. Because humanity cannot thrive under chains, whether visible or hidden. It began because justice delayed, generation after generation, eventually becomes justice demanded. It began because every unconstitutional law, every segregated restaurant, every vote suppressed was another reminder that America had made a promise it had not kept. But perhaps the most profound reason of all, the movement began because ordinary people became extraordinary when history asked them to be brave. Rosa Parks, refusing to stand. Martin Luther King Jr., marching for a dream. Malcolm X, demanding pride and power. Medgar Evers, risking everything for equality. John Lewis, bleeding for democracy. Thousands of unnamed heroes facing batons, jail, and hate, so that millions after them would not have to. And even after the Civil Rights Acts of the 1960s, the struggle didn't simply stop. Racism did not vanish when segregation was outlawed. It evolved. It adapted. That's why the legacy of the civil rights movement still fuels activism today, in courtrooms, classrooms, streets, and voting booths. The movement began because the idea of fairness is unstoppable. Once people taste the possibility of equality, nothing can force them back into silence. They become a river. They become a storm. They become history itself. And so the civil rights movement wasn't triggered by a single event, but by a collective awakening. A decision that enough was enough. A declaration that freedom would no longer be negotiable. In the end, the movement began because America could no longer ignore the truth. To deny equality is to deny its own soul. The voices of the civil rights movement did not demand something new. They demanded that the nation finally become what it always claimed to be. And the fight they began continues in every generation that believes justice is worth marching for.